Hollows and their inhabitants. The Earth is covered with more than 3 trillion trees of more than 60,000 species. Each of them would probably like to live to a ripe old age in good condition, producing countless seeds. However, in a complex network of ecological interactions, there is little chance for this to happen. After all, life is a series of endless difficulties that every organism must overcome in order to move on. It only takes one moment to literally turn an entire world upside down. This time, a wind of change came with the summertime storm, leaving some trees uprooted. Others suffered less damage in the form of cracked trunks or broken branches. Life goes on, however. The anxiety passes, and the forest dwellers return to their daily routines as if nothing special has just happened. Autumn has arrived.
Jesienią w lesie panuje.
In autumn, the forest is quiet and peaceful. Whoever could escape from the forest is gone. The birds have flown away to warm countries, and those that have stayed have had to adapt to a time of cold and hunger. Whoever can disappears, digs burrows, and accumulates fat, like badgers. Badgers can weigh twice as much in autumn as in spring. Owls accumulate fat inside their bodies, but they also store supplies in hollows. That is where an owl can hide a few mice, for example. Such chilled mouse carcasses can be used later in case of hunger, rain, or bad weather. The silence is in fact illusory. If we listened to the forest, especially in the evening, we would hear hedgehogs still roaming around. If a young hedgehog does not reach a body weight of half a kilo, it will simply not survive the winter, because hibernation also requires some energy, which is why the fat needs to be accumulated. Those who can hoard fat inside their bodies, those who cannot accumulate it in their hiding places. The jay, for example, knows how to use the resources of the forest to survive. It stockpiles food, and thanks to the jay scattering acorns around the forest, a young oak tree can grow in unusual places far from the parent oak. This phenomenon is known as zoochory, or seed dispersal by animals. Among the rustle of the trees, we can occasionally hear some noises. Acorns and beechnuts are falling on the layer of leaves. There, they will be waiting for the right moment to sprout in order to join the ranks of the young generation of trees in the future. Observing wild boars passionately eating acorns makes one wonder about the sense of this tree reproduction strategy. An investment of considerable energy and nutrients put into thousands of seeds is about to end up in the stomachs of wild boars in a few moments. But there is a method to this madness. Of the myriad of attractive seeds produced by trees in their lifetime, some will escape the attention of potential gourmets. Some will grow in the vicinity of the mother tree. Others, moved further afield by jays and squirrels, have the opportunity to colonize new areas.
Z naszych pilchowatych
Among our Gliridae, dormice are the most sociable and form the largest communities. They are family groups, sometimes multi-generational. Dormice like forests with very old hollow trees where they can breed, and where all the treetops are intertwined so they can move through the treetops looking for beechwood and acorns. They leave behind their scent signals so that they can return quickly in case of danger. They can move through the treetops like ghosts noiselessly.
Przemieszczać po koronach drzew jak duszki bezszelestnie.
Autumn weather provides favorable conditions for fungal growth. From under the mulch, day after day, new fruiting bodies slowly emerge. From spring to autumn, squirrels live in nests that they have built for themselves. They use the fiber obtained from the bark of aspens. Here the squirrels breed, but in autumn the nests become abandoned and the squirrels move into tree hollows. The hollows must have a tight entrance so that the martins cannot intrude, but they must also be dry on the inside and lined. With every thaw that occurs in winter, and such thaws are becoming more and more frequent, the squirrel wakes up and searches for its supplies. The supplies are partly hidden in various hollows, partly in the hollow where the squirrel was sleeping, but also in many places on the ground, under a piece of bark, under some bigger leaf, and the squirrel remembers all these places. The frozen forest is filled with a poignant silence. Sometimes highly stressed wood fibers, under the influence of a sudden drop in temperature, rip apart, forming vertical fractures in the trunk called frost cracks. The wound closes over time, forming a thickening on the bark of the tree. Trees are exposed to a variety of situations that test their resilience. Not all of them come out unscathed, and not every tree will live to a ripe old age. There can be many reasons for trees dying: pollution, drought, insect attacks, fire, or beaver activity. Defects and even death can paradoxically result in a significant increase in their conservation value.
W lesie znaczenie ma każde drzewo.
Every tree in the forest is important, including dead, dry, broken, or even fallen trees. Of course, if such dry trees are not in an excessive amount. If there is too much brushwood next to traffic routes, especially next to railway tracks, this is just asking for a fire. So there must be some moderation and some balance. But in general, a dead tree in the forest, such as here, we have an oak in which a woodpecker has already made a hole, and there is still a dry branch next to it. This is an important site. Places with dead tree branches are immediately invaded by different types of insects. Various larvae develop under the bark. This is perfect food for woodpeckers. One seemingly innocent fracture can set off an avalanche of events. Fungal spores floating freely in the air when they come across an injured area will start an invasion. If the damage is superficial, the tree will be able to stave off the aggressor, healing the wound over time. Deeper damage does not promise anything good. The developing fungi penetrate deeper and deeper with mycelial hyphae. That will result in decay, making the wood change its structure and original properties, eventually taking the form of a powdery, soft or fibrous mass. The decayed wood will leave an empty cavity called a natural hollow. Such hollows are not formed with the same dynamics in every tree. They tend to be more easily formed in deciduous trees. The resin released by the conifers impregnates the heartwood, protecting it from decay. Hence, in deciduous forests, the chance of natural hollows is greater and the likelihood of their occurrence increases with the age of the tree. As the years pass, the number of damages increases and the defense mechanisms of the trees are less effective. There was an infection here a few years ago. The fungus has produced fruiting bodies, from which spores will be sown, capable of invading other trees. If the tree is, for example, broken, a decaying process will occur at the breakage site. At some point, a hollow will be formed there, a cavity, a perfect resting place for many animals. If the tree is dead and dry, hornets and wasps like to obtain cellulose from such a tree to build their nests. So every tree, in every state of life or death, has significance in the forest and has some important functions. Some organisms, when assisted by fungal activity, are able to make hollows much more quickly. Engineers of this type of structures include woodpeckers and some species of tits. These birds are known as primary hole nesters because they inhabit the hollows made by themselves. While pecking at the hole, the woodpeckers gradually chip off pieces of wood with intense strokes of their beak, burrowing into the tree. After several days of intensive effort, the shelter is ready. This is an excellent time compared to at least a dozen years it would take for a fungus to create a natural hollow with similar characteristics. Unique anatomical adaptations allow woodpeckers to peck despite the tremendous strain experienced by their skull when their beak comes into contact with the wood.
Dziób dzięcioła jest połączony z czaszką nie na zasadzie.
The beak of the woodpecker is connected to the skull not by a joint or some kind of rigid connection, but rather by a highly flexible connection. And these elements are connected to each other by very strong ligaments. As a result, when the beak trembles, the vibrations are not transmitted to the skull because the ligaments absorb all the vibrations and the skull is safe.
Czaszka jest bezpieczna.
Hollow trees play a key role in forests. Many animal species depend on their presence. The spaces lined with decayed wood, access to which is limited to entry holes, create specific thermal and humidity conditions. They provide a sense of security, protect against predators and limit exposure to the weather. For that reason, they are objects of desire and fierce competition. The birchwood, loosened by fungi, provides a favorable habitat for the white-backed woodpecker.
Jak sama nazwa wskazuje,
As the name suggests, the white-backed woodpecker has a white back, and indeed the white ends of the feathers form a triangular white patch on its back. It feeds mainly on birch trees, its favorite kind of tree, also making hollows in them. The white-backed woodpecker likes to forage low above the ground. It chips off whole strips, patches of bark, and there, under the chipped bark, it searches for insect larvae, which it immediately eats.
O właśnie, bobry ścięły kolejne.
Beavers have just felled another tree. They are masters of small-scale retention, engineering and environmental transformation. This is one of the few animal species that can transform the environment to suit its needs, but other animals also benefit. Here, the flooding has caused the death of a group of trees, but these dry trees also have their value. We can clearly see the hollows in them. They are woodpecker hollows. Later on, pygmy and boreal owls eagerly settle in such hollows because a marten will not come to a tree standing in water and will not plunder the hatch of pygmy and boreal owls. These are safe quarters, and the beaver acts as a landscape engineer. Everyone benefits from it, and beavers also contribute to the small-scale retention for which the foresters fight so hard. The floating male goldeneye is an indication that there is a hollow nearby in which the female has set up a nest. In the dense undergrowth of the forest, a dark figure looms into view.
Dzięcioł czarny jest naszym największym.
The black woodpecker is our largest woodpecker. In fact, it is one of the largest in the world. It feeds on various insects extracted from the wood. It also feeds on ants, digging up anthills to get at them. The black woodpecker creates large hollows. It rarely uses them a second time. Excavating a hollow together serves mainly as a stimulation for a couple of black woodpeckers. It takes them up to 3 weeks, and they tend to make a new hollow every year, so there are many abandoned hollows in the forest. Then such hollows are used by tawny owls or by goldeneyes. They were also used by rollers once, but now rollers are very rare. We have just heard a stock dove. This is one of our wood doves. It also nests in the hollows of the black woodpecker. So do bats, wasps and hornets. In general, such hollows are very useful in the forest and highly demanded. There, in that dry pine, is the hollow of a black woodpecker. This is not a live, healthy pine, it is a dry pine. If a woodpecker were to make a hollow in a live pine tree, it would be flooded with resin. That is why dead pines are much better, because they are easier to peck at and there is no resin. So sometimes if a woodpecker is going to breed again in the same area, and there is no other dead pine, it may make a hollow a little lower or higher in the same pine, but it is unlikely it will use the same hollow. Other birds can take advantage of this, and there are sometimes such massive trees, basically bird institutions, where various birds have their distinct nests at different levels, all of which were made by the black woodpecker. So the black woodpecker is actually a producer of housing quarters for many different organisms in the forest.
Mieszkaniowych dla wielu różnych organizmów w lesie.
Small birds sometimes choose surprising locations for their hollows. This great tit decided to make its nest in an abandoned heap of scrap metal.
I proszę.
Oh look, our guest has checked in. The green woodpecker likes the habitats with poplars. It is also very fond of aspens and enjoys making holes in them. When someone sees a green woodpecker up close for the first time, they think that they have seen some kind of parrot because it is green and its rump grows celadon. Generally, it is a beautiful bird, dependent on ants. ants that live in the ground, so it likes to have a nest at the edge of the forest while frequently foraging in mid-forest clearings and meadows where it finds ants and simply feeds on them. The young have hatched in a nesting box occupied by starlings. In addition to feeding, attentive parents need to keep the naked chicks warm. The cubs grow quickly, and on the third day after hatching, down feathers appear on their wings. Three of our tits, a marsh tit, a willow tit, and a crested tit, can excavate a hole by themselves. Of course, only in very rotten, soft wood. Interestingly, according to research, tits have relatively long lifespans for such a small bird. And they use their hollows several times, but they do so by rotating them about every 2 years because of fleas. Tits tend to bring a lot of stuff into their nests. There is moss, some animal hair, some feathers. They line the nest abundantly. This is a perfect place for fleas to thrive. Tit nests are sometimes heavily infested with fleas, so they do not return to the same nest the next year. They either build a new one or use the one they once built, because fleas would just be too much of a nuisance for them. When spring comes to the forest, woodpeckers start to be very active. They are vocally active. They chase each other away. You can hear them everywhere. You can see them everywhere, and they start to make holes. Pecking lasts up to 3 weeks, followed by egg laying. Of course, the female lays them at intervals of about a day. There are usually 3 to 5 eggs, with an average of 4. The parents take turns to incubate the eggs. Incubation is short, only 13 to 14 days. But the young woodpeckers are very clumsy after hatching, eyes closed, naked, bold, but growing fast. They feed mainly on grubs, the larvae of various insects found in the wood. They grow very quickly. The food is rich in protein and vitamins, and when the time to leave the nest arrives, at about 4 weeks of age, they start to look out of the hollow. At some point, they make their first dramatic flight, but they learn to fly rather quickly and continue to be fed for about 2 to 3 weeks. After that, they have to fend for themselves. The hollows created by woodpeckers have rather predictable shapes and dimensions. The largest are the work of the black woodpecker. They can be up to 60 centimeters deep, with an entrance hole measuring 12 by 8 centimeters. The lesser spotted woodpecker, as the smallest domestic woodpecker, makes much smaller hollows. The diameter of an entrance hole is just 3 centimeters, and the depth ranges from 10 to 18 centimeters. Woodpeckers engage in the creation of new hollows with varying frequency. One active couple of birds may create several hollows per year, while another will make the effort once every 3 to 4 years. Making hollows requires a large energy expenditure. For that reason, woodpeckers of most species locate them in dead trees or in dead fragments of living trees. Birds choose the hardest wood they can possibly excavate.
Dziuple, wcześniej zajmowane przez ptaki, bardzo chętnie...
Hollows previously occupied by birds are eagerly populated by a plethora of different invertebrates. If it is a hollow with some plant material, wood rot, bird excrement, larvae of many different insects will find there a safe, moist place with a uniform temperature, not exposed to predation. Hymenoptera, wasps, hornets, honeybees, they all like hollows, but hollows that are rather dry and sunny, where they are safe and can build their nests. After that, nobody will get close to them, but the key requirement is to be safe from water flooding. So the hollow for the Hymenoptera must be dry. The larvae of the hermit beetle develop in the rotten wood, thus participating in the decomposition of the wood. The range of species benefiting from the advantages offered by hollow trees is much wider. The appearance of a predator causes panic amongst the forest dwellers. This time, they have managed to avoid the hawk's talons. Meanwhile, the starlings are covered with down, which will be gradually replaced by growing feathers. Pygmy owls enjoy small hollows made by great spotted woodpeckers. The pygmy owl is the smallest of our owls, about the size of a starling. It occupies tiny hollows, usually high above the ground, which makes them difficult to find. And this hollow is able to accommodate everything. The cubs are housed there, and supplies are stored there in case of need. If there are no rodents, if there are very few mice in a given year, then the pygmy owl focuses on hunting birds. And such a distinctive whistling in the woods. It is the pygmy owl, and the birds will immediately become nervous because they know that voice, they know that predator. The pygmy owl is also active during the day, so the birds obviously know what it looks like, and they are scared of this predator because it can hunt anything from a tit to a starling. Boreal owls, due to their larger size, use quarters prepared by black woodpeckers. Tawny owls, on the other hand, need more spacious, mostly natural hollows, usually formed in trees with broken thick trunks or branches. An interesting way of finding the perfect dwelling has been developed by nuthatches. They use hollows, of course, but they adapt the size of the hollow opening to their needs. They seal the opening using clay and plant material. This hollow is extremely narrow, they go inside, and the female lays white eggs. Nuthatches can have many chicks, as there may be 5 to 7 eggs in a brood. The parents take great care in warming, nurturing, and feeding them. As a result, the chicks grow quickly, and then the whole nuthatch family pokes around the forest. Narrow crevices in the trunks or spaces under detached bark are the perfect shelter places for some bats. In winter, these mammals use their hollows as winter hibernation sites. In summer, on the other hand, they serve as daytime hiding places and breeding colonies. The nest is becoming tighter and tighter. The juvenile starlings are almost the size of adult birds. They are now covered with grey-brown feathers, characteristic for juvenile individuals of this species. This oak trunk has become a mating arena for tree creepers. Passing food to each other is part of their mating ritual.
Mamy w Polsce dwa gatunki pełzaczy.
We have two species of tree creepers in Poland, forest and garden tree creepers. These two species are a relic of the last glaciation as the ice sheet split the population of the original tree creepers. It lasted a very long time, so long in fact that when the ice sheet retreated, the two populations were already singing differently, had different habits and different habitat preferences. The tree creeper needs a crevice for breeding, a chipped bark, for example a crack in the tree where the bark comes off, such a hidden place, and there it builds a tiny nest of small sticks squeezed into the crevice. Tree creepers use their tails as supports. Like woodpeckers, tree creepers also have very stiff rectrices, and they rely on them when walking up a tree. A pair of blue tits have adopted a metal barrier for their nest. And the fact that it is sometimes in use does not seem to bother the birds at all.
Dzięcioł czarny jest z racji...
The black woodpecker, due to the size of its hollow, is most vulnerable to predation by martins. In the daytime, predators would do poorly because a pair of black woodpeckers can chase them away quite effectively. But at night, the situation is completely different. If there are only chicks in the hollow and no adult bird, the martin can boldly climb in there. The young will still be clumsy. The martin, however, does not look for birds or prey or hollows by walking in the trees. It walks around the ground, sniffing and checking around. And if it senses the smell of fresh feces somewhere, for example in a dense copse, it can be sure that some bird is sleeping there. It will quietly check what kind of bird it is and plan it for dinner. This is why many hole nesters carry the droppings of their chicks as far away from the nest as possible. But at some point, young woodpeckers begin to excrete their feces through the opening of the hollow. The excrement falls out from the tree onto the ground. Then, at night, the martin can actually sniff out such fresh droppings and climb the tree quietly and check it out. If there are young woodpeckers, then the parents are not inside and the martin can steal such a brood. The tits are relentless in their efforts to raise as many offspring as possible. They bend over backwards to feed a dozen or so ever-hungry beaks. The older the forest, the thicker the trees, the more hollows can be found. Also, their standard varies, and every demanding hole-nesting bird will choose something for himself. This is why it is so important that mature tree stands are constantly present in the forest landscape. In commercial forests, it is common practice to leave old trees and specimens that are particularly attractive to hole-nesting bird species. Timber harvesting takes place here almost all year round, as the timber industry, which is a thriving industry, requires a stable supply of raw material. In order to provide the necessary habitat for birds, a number of conservation measures are applied, which include leaving hollow trees and parts of stands to die naturally. Foresters search for and mark such trees before harvesting so that the harvester operator or logger can spot them in time to protect them from felling. So why are some hollow trees sometimes felled if they are so valuable and their nature conservation value far exceeds their economic value? Some trees are felled unintentionally as a result of overlooking. Be aware that searching for hollows when the foliage is full is extremely difficult. Some have to be toppled because of the danger they pose to people. Hollows are often found in old, decayed, and weakened trees. The very existence of a hollow also increases the susceptibility to fracture. Vibrations in the ground or a slight gust of wind can easily break such a tree, leading to tragedy. This has unfortunately happened more than once in history. Such trees are usually left in the woods to continue supporting their natural wealth. Soon the woodpeckers will probably carve out a new hollow nearby. Trees grow at different rates. The trunks of fast-growing aspens, birches, and willows reach the size required to make a hollow much faster than those of pines, oaks, or beeches. The black-backed woodpecker can already forge its hollow in 50-year-old aspen trees. If it wanted to forge a hollow in a pine or beech tree, it would have to wait a little longer before it reached the right thickness. The enrichment of stands with fast-growing species greatly facilitates the colonization of younger forest fragments by cavity-nesting birds. Particularly noteworthy is the wryneck. It is the only Polish woodpecker to migrate to Africa, unable to find enough food in our country in winter. And what also makes the wryneck unique is the fact that it does not make its own hollows. It is just as eager to use the hollows excavated by its fellows as it is to use nest boxes. The posting of nesting boxes is the most popular form of increasing the number of nesting sites.
W lesie takim jak ten, bogatym, nie za młodym, jest mnóstwo...
In a forest like this one, rich and not too young, there are plenty of nesting opportunities for birds that use hollows. There are many different hollows here. They are hidden, so the birds have to know them. They have to find them. Hanging nesting boxes in such a forest makes no sense. But if we have a young forest with no dead trees yet, no hollow trees, no woodpeckers, where you would have to wait some time for the trees to grow and for the woodpeckers and hollow trees to appear, foresters help birds, and not only birds, also bats and many different insects, by hanging nesting boxes. Boxes hung by foresters generally have the correct design, but when someone builds them at home, they are not always properly constructed. So let me remind you, no sticks, because the sticks make it easier for the predator to hunt. We do not use sticks. The canopy should be slanted towards the entrance hole, and the entrance hole must be as close to the canopy as possible to leave as much space below as possible, so that the marten or cat cannot put their paw in there. So we should observe the design and make sure the diameters are correct and not too big. If there are martens in the forest, there is no point in making large nesting boxes for tawny owls or goosanders, because martens will go in there and check everything. And nesting boxes for normal hole nesters such as tits, flycatchers, redstarts have to be built properly with a proper opening. We hang them on a vertical trunk with no branches next to them, at such a height that a casual passerby, a potential hooligan, could not reach in and inflict damage, so a small ladder can come in handy for this. All that remains is to position the door so that it can be opened safely, but preventing it from opening it by itself. In autumn, after the 1st of October, you should make the rounds with a spatula and clean the boxes, because the birds prefer to nest in clean boxes. Despite their undoubted advantages, nesting boxes are not able to fully replace hollows in forest ecosystems. One of the reasons is that not all hole nesters use their benefits. They insulate much less than hollows from the conditions outside. On hot days inside nesting boxes, there is a much higher temperature and lower humidity than in hollows. At such times, chicks are at risk of overheating and dehydration. That is why it is so important to avoid hanging uncovered boxes facing south. Young starlings often look out through the opening, demanding food and exploring their surroundings. Finally, about 20 days after hatching, the first one decides to take the leap into adulthood. It made it. The other juveniles, encouraged by their parents with food, follow in the footsteps of their sibling. Until autumn, they will be busy foraging in preparation for their departure to the south. The results of bird monitoring indicate an increasing abundance of many woodpecker species. This may indicate, among other things, positive changes taking place in Polish forests. More woodpeckers means more hollows. Probably for this reason, many secondary cavity nesting bird species are also increasing their population size. The average age of forests in Poland is gradually increasing. Until recently, a pine forest grew here. The timber harvested from it is probably already in our homes in various forms. Now, a new generation is growing up. In a few decades, it will look as impressive as the adjacent parts of the forest. Nowadays, no one seems to need convincing about the importance of protecting hollow trees. Competent forest management, recognition of the needs of its inhabitants, and a modicum of goodwill can ensure that our forests will be invariably teeming with life.